So, welcome to Lake Worth Interfaith Network's Global Enlightenment Meditation. As you know, every week we have a different presenter from a different faith tradition sharing all varieties of different types of meditation. And Jason needs no introduction to anybody here. We're just really, really super delighted to have you with us today, Jason. So, with that, we'll turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, and good to be with you all tonight. And yes, so I come from the Christian faith tradition. That's the language that I'm familiar with and that works best for me. But I love how at the fringes of each of our faith traditions there is significant overlap. And I think that's especially true with what I'm hoping to share with you tonight, which is psalm chanting. And so chanting is something that shows up in just about every faith tradition. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then talk specifically about the Psalms. So how I came in contact with this practice is through Benedictine spirituality. So a monastic tradition within Catholicism. I'm not Catholic. I come from a Protestant tradition, but with a deep appreciation for it. And the way that Benedictines are in the world, which is something that I am so interested in, is how does our faith, how does our spirituality inform our engagement with the world? And I think the Benedictine model for that is great. And I'm sure we're familiar with Ora et Labora, prayer and work. And I love the way that Cynthia Bourgeault kind of looks at this through what she calls the Benedictine quadrant, which is work alone, work together, prayer alone, and prayer together. And since we're kind of in a compact time, we'll leave work maybe for another time, but she divides prayer into prayer alone and prayer together. So if you had to guess as a good group of meditators what prayer alone might be, what would you say? Ted.
Well, go into your inner room, and pray out of the sight of others. Especially, Christ warns about putting on a show and trying to get status or other people acknowledge you as pious for making a public display. So the prayer alone would be that going into your inner room and having your prayers with you and your Creator alone in private.
Yeah. And I think, silent prayer, meditation, centering prayer is a great example of prayer alone. Even though, as we do in this group, we often do that together. That's what the Benedictines see as that prayer alone, that time of contemplative prayer, Lectio Divina as they practice. That's the prayer alone. But they also pray together, as we do in all of our faith traditions. And the way that Benedictines pray together is through the keeping of the office, which is 7 periods of prayer over the course of the day that are based on the Psalms. And those are often chanted. And so that's the prayer together. And that's a tradition that we can participate in, even if we're not in community and praying those things together, if by engaging in the offices or engaging in what those prayer times are in whatever your faith tradition is, we can engage in prayer together. So that prayer together for Benedictines is chanting Psalms, which is a tradition that's shared across Judaism into Christianity. So, so just some benefits of that. So the spiritual is connection with the divine, connection with tradition. When we enter into these offices, when we enter into this stream was a stream that is oftentimes centuries, even millennia old, in connection with one another. So as we engage in the prayer times of our traditions, like we said, even though we might be doing that alone, we're doing that in concert with other folks that are participating in those same practices and traditions. There's psychological benefits to it, relieves stress, emotional relief. We'll talk about that, especially as we talk about some of the Psalms, and improved concentration. So focus and memory are all helped with chanting. And then there are a ton of physical benefits to it. First of all, breathing. So when we're singing, when we're chanting, we have to be a little bit more intentional with our breath. Vagal nerve stimulation. The vagal nerve is stimulated by chanting and singing. So that activates our parasympathetic system and kind of relieves stress and reduces anxiety. Improved posture. I'm sitting on the couch, so you can't tell that right now. But as we're singing, as we're chanting, a lot of times our posture will just naturally improve. Endorphin release, improved immune system function, vocal health, improved auditory skills. So Cynthia Bourgeault tells the story of a Benedictine community in Abbey. And so work and prayer, and this was an abbey that they did a lot of work. I forgot exactly what it was that was their industry, but they said, well, why don't we stop the singing? That takes up a lot of time. It seems really inefficient. And so they did. And what happened is the participants in that community who had lived lives of these offices of prayer started getting physically sick and didn't understand what was happening. They took a step back and looked at it and realized that it was quite possibly because they stopped this practice of singing, chanting, praying together. So physical benefits, which we don't always think about with our spiritual practices that come from chanting. Cynthia Bourgeault says, it has often struck me that chanting in any tradition is fundamentally a deep immersion experience in the creative power of the universe. Because to make music, you must work in your body, mind, and spirit with the four holy elements out of which the earth was fashioned and through which all spiritual transformation happens. And those four elements are breath, tone, intentionality, and community. Kathleen Norris, a book that was written a while ago, I think in the 90s, Cloister Walk, some of us might be familiar with, talks specifically about the Psalms. And, so as folks in the Jewish tradition, those of us in the Christian tradition, the chant book for us is the Psalms, which cover just such an incredible range of emotions. So we're kind of used to the public psalms of praise, but there's all kinds of psalms where the poet is just decrying their experience and seeing God even as against them and just expressing anger, expressing sadness, expressing disappointment. And sometimes we skip over those because they're not so pleasant to read. But here's what Kathleen Norris says: the value of this great psalm book of the Bible lies not in the fact that singing praise can alleviate pain, but that the painful images we find there are essential for praise, for without them, praise is meaningless. So whatever emotion we're experiencing, we can usually find in the Psalms. And so if we're in a practice of going through those on a periodic basis, can kind of become a helpful soundtrack, I think, for our lives. So I lost a slide somewhere, but that's okay. So we'll do this psalm. So Psalm 133 I know, is a favorite Elwyn psalm, because it really speaks to our relationships with one another, is people of different faiths. So I thought that we would use this to practice. And so unfortunately, we can't do that together so that we can hear each other on Zoom. Unless I haven't tried it in a while, unless the technology has significantly improved in the last year. So as you're doing that, and that might feel safer for us anyway, so you can mute yourself as we practice this. I wish we could hear each other, although I know sometimes that feels awkward to us because we don't sing a whole lot together anymore, which is unfortunate. And Cynthia Brazeau speaks of one of the benefits of chanting the Psalms is it kind of strips us of our anxieties and insecurities if we're able to do that in a supportive environment together. So chanting since Vatican II in the Catholic Christian tradition. So we're used to hearing Gregorian chant. So chanting kind of started as a spiritual practice, and as often happens in faith traditions, it becomes more and more complicated and more complex, so that only professionals can do it. And so that's kind of what happened with the history of chant within Christianity. And so we came to Gregorian chant, which is beautiful and wonderful to listen to, but most of us can't do that ourselves. So one of the things that happened in Vatican II was Gregorian chant was set to the side, and plain chant that folks could actually practice came to the forefront. So chanting can be just as simple as intoning something on one tone. So an example of that would be, see how good, how pleasant it is for God's people to live together as one. So that's a wonderful place just to start. So why don't we try that together? So we'll mute ourselves. I won't mute myself, but let's try chanting this psalm. It's a short psalm together. This is from the Inclusive Language Bible. They use the actual Hebrew word for God or the Lord, which we'll pronounce for our purposes as Yahweh. In the original, there are no vowels in it, because the name of God isn't spoken. And it's a I've heard Richard Rohr describe it as a breath, Yahweh, which I think is a beautiful way to understand the presence of God. Interesting story. He was sharing that he has something that's called the Yahweh prayer, which is exhaling on the first syllable, inhaling on the second. And he was taught that by a rabbi. He was at a seminar demonstrating that prayer, and a Muslim gentleman came up to him and he said, in Islam, there's a tradition of Allah being the same way, that Allah is a breath, Allah. And just such a wonderful connection between two faith traditions. But for our purposes, we'll use the vowels and use Yahweh or whatever name for God that you are comfortable with and that's meaningful to you. So let's just practice that just on the one tone. See how good, how pleasant it is for God's people to live together as one. It is like precious oil on Aaron's head, running down his beard, running down to the collar of his robes. It is like the dew of Mount Hermon, falling on the hills of Zion. For that is where Yahweh bestows the blessing, life that never ends. And so chanting a psalm can be just as simple as that. And, you know, Cynthia Brigeau says that to 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 chant the whole Psalter that way before you even move on to anything else. But there's all kinds of ways to add elements to that. And so one simple way to do that is just to go up on the first phrase of a couplet and go down on the second phrase. So see how good it is, see how good, how pleasant it is for God's people to live together as one. See how good, how pleasant it is for God's people to live together as one. And then another just simple way to chant, which is pretty familiar with folks and common, as see how good, how pleasant it is for God's people to live together as one. See how good, how pleasant it is for God's people to live together as one. And so the way that you kind of learn to do that is it's whatever the accented, the closest accented syllable to the end of a line is. And you could look at it and try to figure that all out. Or you could just chant it. And it's amazing how quickly the ear kind of learns that. And so I think it's just best to kind of let ourselves into the process rather than thinking too much about it. So so why don't we do that together? We'll chant this psalm going up on the end of the first phrase of a couplet, and then doing the passing tones on the second phrase. That third verse, it's like a precious oil on Aaron's head running down on his beard. We'll treat that all as one line, just for our purposes tonight. See how good, how pleasant it is for God's people to live together as one. It is like precious oil on Aaron's head, running down on his beard, running down to the collar of his robes. It is like the dew of Mount Hermon, falling on the hills of Zion. For that is where Yahweh bestows the blessing, life that never ends. See how good, how pleasant it is for God's people to live together as one. It is like precious oil on Aaron's head, running down on his beard, running down to the collar of his robes. It is like the dew of Mount Hermon, falling on the hills of Zion. For that is where Yahweh bestows the blessing, life that never ends. Now we'll go into 5 minutes just of silence. Amen. So would love to hear from you. If you've never done that before, what did it feel like? If you engage in a practice of chanting psalms, what does that what does that look like for you, and how do you experience that? What is your experience of chanting within your faith tradition, if it's not Psalms?
Hello.
Hello.
Gurnam here. Yeah, my spiritual path was just chock full of chanting. Chock full of chanting. So our every morning practice was an hour of chanting of 5 different mantras. We had musical services. I just recently, on my trips, I put in a couple of my chanting tapes that I kind of rediscovered. And I tell you, it just immediately puts a centered, happy feeling in my body. And I love chanting. Thanks.
Thank you. Is that still a regular practice for you?
Not as regular, but I think this is a good reminder between renewing the use of those CDs and then your talk tonight. I'm going to get that more regular.
We have, and Mary may be with me in this one, we have Taizé.
Yes.
And for me, it's so spiritual. I think of all the practices in the church. That is the one that keeps me focused all the time because it's so relaxing and it's like being here but not being here. You see what I mean?
Yes.
It's another experience. It's getting out of yourself, just praising and praising and praising. It's very beautiful.
Thank you, Luz. John, I know you have to go right at 7, so I think you wanted to share something.
Yes, us Quakers chant in silence. But Nick and Sienna are doing shape song, sacred song at the meeting house this Sunday.
Oh, wow.
12 o'clock potluck, 1 o'clock singing. The notice is in the newsletter, the Quaker newsletter, and on the homepage of our website, and it's open to everybody. So if you want to come along and join, feel free to do so.
Thank you for that, John. Yeah, I think any opportunity for singing or chanting together can't be anything but beneficial.
So we as Quakers don't normally do that, but we open our meeting house to those who like to do that. So I'm going to say goodnight for now because I have another Quaker Zoom to go to.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John, and thanks for opening your meeting house, because I've been to many a kirtan chanting session at the meeting house. Thanks.
We at the Episcopal Church I attend during Lent, we do this. We call it the Great Litany, and the choir director he intones a thing, and then we all kind of answer back. But the choir walks around the church, and we walk, and it's like we're doing a repetitive response to the lines that he's reading, and I just feel like I'm in the Middle Ages when I'm doing it. I really love it. It's not everybody likes it, but I find it very spiritual for me.
So the choir actually surrounds the
yeah. We walk, we process, but then we walk all the way around and then up and all the way around, and we do it 3 times while the psalm is being read and we're answering back. So it's really interesting, but it sets such a tone, and I love it.
I might have to take a Sunday off during Lent and
yeah. See that.
Anyone else? Yeah, Mary.
Unmute, Mary. We can't hear you.
I think you might have pushed it twice.
Yeah, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and there was a lot of chanting, and I think that they used to do it more often, and I think it's more now, like at Lent or at the I'm particularly thinking of Good Friday, especially. Good Friday has a lot of chanting. The prayers are chanted, and they go on for quite some time. And those tones that you were using, Jason, those are very familiar to me. I felt like I was right back there. So thank you for bringing this to us and renewing this practice and this experience. And I really didn't realize all of the benefits of the chanting. I knew that when I used to read the Psalms, I had an awful lot of emotional help from that. But so now the chanting is, thank you so much.
And I think so chanting hits all three of these, all three of Bourgeois spirituality looks at three centers, which isn't uncommon, but body, heart, mind. In chanting, when we intone these things out loud, it filters through all three of those centers and engages all three of those centers. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
This was wonderful. Ted, anything we need to know that's coming up?
Well, thank you for your presentation, and the impact of that, I think, is going to be lasting on all of us.